Hi, my name is Marilyn Hollinger and I'm the Director of User Experience at MarkLogic. I'd like to talk to you today about using user experience design techniques to be more successful in your technology projects. So first I want to talk to you about what is user experience design and then why should you care about it? Why am I talking to you about this today? And finally, just the start of how you might use this type of technique in your projects. So first of all, what is user experience design? At its core, it's designing for people, for the people who are actually going to use the software that you're building. And it's important to really focus on those people instead of what we think they need or what we've heard they need, but to really look at their perspectives. So UX is usually seen as the very visual, what's on the screen. And that's what we call UI design. That's the user interface design. But it's really the whole experience that's more important. So UX as a discipline is actually much, much more than just what you see on the screen. That's the result of doing research and user testing, prototyping, organizing taxonomies, figuring out what terminology, what jargon our users use. So it's a whole lot of other disciplines that are brought into the design, not just the visuals. In fact, it's kind of an art and a science, the combination. So the art is really the flow and the ease with which you can use it and that it's aesthetically pleasing, whereas the science is about the requirements, it's about the technology, it's testing and using test results to drive design, so it's very scientific also. So let's talk about the aspects of good user experience design. Most importantly, it has to be complete and accurate. If somebody is using a product, they have to trust the data that they're getting. They have to trust what the application is telling them. Second, it has to be fast and easy to use. It has to be very efficient. Remember, people are using these tools not as the end result. It's not like a game where the game is the result. It's tools that they use to get their job done, and their job is bigger than any tool that we build. And so they need to get in and out, fast and efficient, get their job done, because the goal is the job, not the tool. It also should be something that they enjoy using. Many of our tools are used hours every day by people, and we really want that to be a good experience. The tools also need to be very forgiving. So how many times have you gone to put in a new password, you're creating an account, right? And the system doesn't tell you what the requirements are. You put in a password and it says invalid password, or your password isn't strong enough. And then you keep trying and finally you are so frustrated. When in fact all it had to do was tell you what the requirements were up front. So it should tolerate errors and it should prevent them also. And finally, it should be easy to learn, very predictable. If you're using a concept that's used in another application, make it look and act like that other application. So you have to understand the whole ecosystem that the user is working in. Like if they're an Excel user and you have formulas, they should look and act like Excel formulas as much as possible, because then it'll be easy for that user to learn because they already know Excel, for example. Now this takes time. It takes time to do all of these steps and to do the work up front to make sure that your design will fit these criteria, but it's worth it. And who am I to argue with Aaron Levy? It is absolutely true that taking that extra time is worth it. So why should you care about this? Well, good design is important because oftentimes not doing it can lead to failed projects. IEEE did some studies on failed projects and found that up to 15% of IT projects fail before they're completed. They're just hopelessly inadequate. And even if a project does move forward, oftentimes developers can spend up to 50% of subsequent releases on rework. That's a huge waste. And finally, they found that 25% of the failures are often related to user experience. That the basic requirements were not discovered and there was not good communication with users. Now that communication with users is important because it gives you perspective. Perspective is really important in good design. If you design from the perspective of a user's mental model, how they think, you're going to be more successful. And if you come up with some model that is not the way they think, that's the way the technology drives or someone thinks they should be thinking, your success rate is much lower. And this has been studied and found over and over again, actually. So overall, how does good UX design affect your organization? Well, if you're designing something new and it's good and it's well designed, people will uptake it more quickly. And you won't have as much support on it. You won't have as many calls to that support desk. You won't have as much investment in trying to help people even learn it. Your business will be more efficient because people, again, that in and out, getting in and out and getting their job done more quickly. And they'll enjoy it. Your users will enjoy using the products that you're building. So when it comes to the bottom line, this is a study that was done about 5 years ago from the Design Management Institute. And they took companies that really led the way in terms of design of their products, of their advertising, of their websites, and found that they actually performed better in business when they were design-led versus when they were not. So the DVI is the Design Value Index. It's pretty impressive. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. This has been around for a long time. If you do good design, it will help your business. So how can you start doing this? How can you start saying, yeah, I really want to put users first. I really want to get that user perspective. Well, there's sort of 3 big parts to projects where this comes into play. The first is in the discovery. When you're first starting out on the project, it's important to engage UX professionals. There's, for some reason, and I don't know why this is, there's a lot of people think that they can do user experience design. And it's sort of like saying, oh, anyone can program. No, you really need some training and you need some experience. And same thing with any type of professional. I can't decide I'm going to run out and be a nurse without any training, right? And same thing with UX professionals. And what we're trained to do is that kind of discovery. We figure out who we're designing for. You may have heard the term personas, which is a stereotypical kind of role that we name and personify, and really figure out what are their goals, what are their priorities, what are the issues they run into, what are they trying to deliver, what is their job. And then during the design phase, figuring out the best way for your software to work, to get input from users, to start with very rough designs, get early input, move before you move into detailed design. And then once you do have a product, how do you iterate it? How do you test it? What can you learn from that so you can improve? So if you look at the software development life cycle, which many of us are familiar with, the user experience activities and life cycle parallel that. The UX is really, when it's successful, is really part of that development team. Now, it doesn't work out that time-wise things happen all at the same time. For example, before you start planning a software development project, you should be figuring out who you're building this for. Someone says, let's build a whatever. The next question should be, who's the user? And tell me about the user and what's important to them. And before you do the analysis that leads to your software design, figure out what that user needs and how they're going to use the product. And then do your analysis for your design. And before you actually get into your software design, figure out the user experience design. I don't know how many times I have designed a front end user experience only to be told the back end doesn't support that flow or the back end doesn't provide that data. And in fact, it's needed to make the optimal user experience. So if you do those designs, maybe you don't finish the designs, but you at least do that wireframing and basic flows, then when you do the software design, you're much more likely to meet the requirements of the front-end design, which meets the requirements of your users. Then things start to sync up. So then when you get into your implementation, the UX team works with the development team. It's a partnership where they monitor what's being implemented, they make sure that it meets that it matches the user experience design. And you can do some early testing at that point when you have early implementation. Put it actually in front of users and say, what do you think about this? Is that going to help you? Is that going to meet your requirements? And then you can do more extensive usability testing when you actually have something in it, some software integrated. You can do some testing. And then when you're doing the maintenance phase of software development, that's when you iterate on the experience also. So this is a process that works together. So during that discovery period, I mentioned personas. And this is Stuart. Stuart is our data architect persona that we use at MarkLogic. And we actually talk about Stuart as a person. We say, is Stuart going to like this? Is this going to work with Stuart's workflow? Who does Stuart talk to in his job? What tools does Stuart use? We actually do that. And as human beings, we are wired to react to human beings. And so the more personification we have with Stuart, the more likely we are to care about meeting his requirements. We also do what are called process maps. Don't try to read this, it's too small. But this is an overall map of actually Data Hub. It's an early version of a map of Data Hub, where we're talking about how does data flow? What are the actions and who does what? The green column is a list of personas. Stuart is one of those. And so it shows how the operation of using Data Hub flows between users and what they do. And this is a blow-up of part of Stuart's. So you can see what it is Stuart does and what flows together. And this is important because it drives the user experience design. And it drives the requirements. What does Stuart need? Now, many of you have seen this or versions of this. It's been circulating since 1989. And it's very funny. We laugh at it. But it really is quite reflective of what we see in software development projects. That early on, we ask the customers explain, oh, this is what I need. But it's not so much about what they said, but how we heard it. And we oftentimes, if we don't pull in these user experience design techniques, we don't go back and ask the right questions. We don't validate what they say. And so we end up with something that is not what the customer really needed because we didn't get the requirements right. So let's talk about what happens. So that's the upfront work. Then we start actually doing design. And we might start with something like an early wireframe. These are quick, these are easy, there's no investment in this really. You can iterate it, and it's important to do that to make the iteration easy. The harder it is to iterate, the less likely you are to make changes. And the idea here is to get input and make changes. You don't want to build a whole system and then it's hard to make changes. It's sort of cast in concrete already at that point. So you go through wireframes, you do some initial, we often show these to our users, even though they're pretty rough. And then you do something, a mock-up that's more like what the product is going to be. And then you do it again. You go back to users again. And this sounds like a lot of back and forth, but it's not that difficult to do, and it pays off because you're more likely to get it right, to have that successful project that you're shooting for. And then you iterate. We all know you put out version 1 and then you figure out what you did wrong and you put out version 2. And you upgrade and you iterate and you add functionality and you fix things, and that applies to the user experience also, not just the core software. So design is really a key piece of the success of a product. And it's not just what it looks like. It's how it works and what it does for users. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you found this informative.